Hello. Today I'm wearing red because it's one, the font color for the show we're going to be talking about. Two, it symbolizes all of the blood, unfortunately, that was shed during this show. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Jess. I absolutely love K-dramas and I just want to chat about them. And if you're not new here, thanks for being subscribed to the channel and welcome back. Today we're talking about the new Netflix K-drama called The 8 Show. And as usual, I have lots of thoughts. So get comfy, grab a drink, and let's just chat about it. So The 8 Show is described as a dark comedy about 8 people who are in desperate need of money. So they decide to participate on what is essentially kind of like a reality TV show. And since they're in desperate need of money, they're put inside the show, which is essentially just concrete walls and literally nothing else. There's no beds, so food and water are provided, but if they want to buy anything else, it is going to cost 1,000 times more than it would cost in the real world, and that money is deducted from the final prize pool. So the show is based on 2 webtoons, Money Game and Pie Game by Bae Jin Soo. So unlike my last video where I didn't read either of the source materials, this one I not only read Money Game, but I also read Pie Game just so I would have all of the context. So if you're a fan of Squid Games, like you're kind of okay with a little bit of gore and you love any show that kind of just examines human psychology, then this is definitely the show for you. Now that we've covered the background, let the show begin. The show starts with the introduction of our main protagonist, who we'll call number 3, and he is played by Jun-Yeol. So he's been scammed by someone who he considered to be a friend, and as a result, he lost a lot of money and is currently in debt. He goes to a bridge to ultimately end his life, and just as he's about to do that, a limo just appears and the door opens for him to go inside. I don't know why, but that scene kind of reminded me of another K-drama called Taxi Driver, where a taxi would randomly show up to help those in need. But in this show, it's gonna help you, but at what cost? So the limo takes him to a theater, and when he walks inside, there is a table with a set of cards, as well as a little note saying that there's enough money presented if he'd like to turn around and go home. Otherwise, if he wants to continue participation in this game, he'll select a card numbered 1 through 8. And it's important to note that the characters don't realize it, but the order they came into this theater is really important because that determines the number of cards that are available later on. And while they don't realize that it's a big deal because they're just randomly picking a number, that will be a huge deal later on in the show. After selecting a card and choosing to participate in this game, the characters walk through a set of curtains and end up in the main community room. It very much looks like a playground and everything is super colorful, like honestly giving Squid Games vibe a little bit. But upon like further inspection, everything is essentially fake and very plasticky. So the characters go up to their rooms and they're able to find the rooms based on the number card they selected. And from there, they are presented the 4 main rules for the game. Rule number 1 is that they have to hand in all of their possessions that they came with, as well as their clothes, and change into the provided uniforms. I legit could not stop laughing at the uniforms they gave them. Like, they were completely white. They kind of looked like suits, but there were no pockets whatsoever. So like they would like try and put something in their pocket and then realize, oh my God, like it's legit not a real pocket. And I don't know why, but it was just so funny. But it also continues to reiterate what I was saying about the playground being fake, because the pockets, while they look real, were also fake as well. Rule number 2 is that food and shelter are provided for free. And then rule number 3 is that everyone earns a certain amount per minute. And if they want to make additional purchases, that is deducted from their individual prize pool at a special rate, which is actually $1,000 more than what it would cost outside of the game. So for example, if they wanted to buy a drink or something, that was usually $1. In this case, it would cost $1,000. Lastly, rule number 4, there is also something that is a community monetary amount, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So now that we've talked about the setup of the game, what the rules are, it's time to meet the characters and learn who they are as well as how they ended up on the show. First up is number 1. So I'll be referring to all of the characters by the numbers that they picked. This is how they were referenced in the show as well as the webtoon. And the reason that was done was to keep a sense of anonymity between the characters. Back to number 1. He's a member of a circus and he has a slight limp. Remember that because it's going to be very important for the story. So he joins the show because his daughter has a rare disease and is being kicked out of the hospital because him as well as his wife cannot afford to pay the hospital bill. So in an effort to earn money, he creates a life insurance policy which would provide for the family if he died. To make that come true, he tries to end his life by walking into a highway, and then all of a sudden, similar to number 3, a limo appears with the opportunity to change his future. Next up is number 2. She's a woman with blonde hair. When she enters the game, she's wearing a bright orange vest and a helmet similar to that of a delivery person. And in her background story, we learned that her boss, still not sure what kind of boss it is, ends up in the hospital and the treatment will cost a lot of money. So her reason for joining is to earn money for that. I have to say, number 2 is my favorite character in the show. She has morals, which is a lot more than I can say for some of the other characters we'll talk about, and she looks out for those weaker than her. So I stand. We've already talked about our lead number 3, so let's jump to number 4. She's the youngest woman of the characters. In the flashback, we're shown that she worked at a department store, specifically telling people where not to park, and she constantly interacted with wealthy people who would be rude and extremely disrespectful to her. So when she joins the game, she asks for sticky notes and writes a note to herself that says, "If there's time to eat, there's time to set your mind. If I set my mind 3 times a day, just like I eat 3 meals, it will change my life." And throughout the course of the show, she's writing tons of sticky notes. As a character, I really didn't like her. Unlike other people who are outright villains, she's extremely selfish and masquerades her venomous intentions behind being nice and appearing naive. So number 4 has a pretty decent relationship with number 5, who is kind of the mom of the group. She tells us multiple times that she was a nurse. We learned that she was pretty well off and married to a dermatologist who would always cheat on her. Yikes. One day she met a man who made her feel wanted and whispered sweet nothings to her. When he asked to borrow money, she took out a loan using her house as leverage. Girl, what are you doing? And when she finally woke up and realized what was happening, her husband had divorced her and now she was broke. Next up is number 6, who is one of the main villains. When he enters the game, the first thing you notice is that he has a lot of bruises on his face as well as his back. And we learned that he used to be a baseball player but was kicked out for illegal gambling. And now he is a used car salesman who beats people up, I guess. As a character, he makes rash decisions and will do anything to benefit his interests rather than that of the group. Number 7 is a scriptwriter and director. In his flashback, we see that he wrote a script, but it was tossed aside by the producer for being boring and not providing enough entertainment. I wonder if that will be important later on in the story? Question mark. He served as the voice of reason amongst the characters and existed to make sure rules were being followed, but I also found him to be a little bit shady. Finally, we have number 8, who is one of the most important characters in this show. She's absolutely unhinged. insensitive and has such a carefree attitude that it personally rubs me the wrong way. And all of the characters feel the same way I do. In the past, she was a performance artist, and now she has millions of dollars of debt. Before we jump back into the main story and the plot points, I have to say, one of my major complaints and criticisms of the show is the lack of character development. So at the beginning of each of the 8 episodes of the show, we'd see one of our 8 characters and their journey as they entered the game, in terms of like specifically when they entered the theater and they were picking a card and reading the instructions. But during those small snippets, there was absolutely like no information given to us about who they are as a character, and even like how they ended up in this show. Like, do they need money? Like, there was literally nothing given to us. It isn't until episode 8, and specifically the beginning, where we start to learn a little bit of background information about the characters. And the way it happens is honestly like absolutely ridiculous, because every couple of minutes the camera would slowly like pan to one of the characters, and then out of the blue we're just seeing a little bit of their background information and why they ended up on the show. And 1, it just felt completely unnecessary. 2, it really didn't make sense for the story, because they would be talking about something completely random, and then all of a sudden we're getting a bunch of exposition when all of that should have happened several episodes prior. And even with the information we were given, it honestly still did not feel like enough. Like, I legit was going through my notes, and for some of the characters, I really can't tell you what their motivation for being in this game is, because the show honestly just didn't give us that information. And for me, it just makes it really hard to relate to the characters as well as even care about them, because for 7 episodes, we didn't really have any information on who they are. And then when we're given all of the information, it's a little too late, especially with the circumstances of everything that happens. And for some of the characters, I had already guessed what their background story would be, just based on like little context clues, which I guess is a small victory for me, but still I felt like rather unimpressed when it was actually revealed in the last episode. Back to the cards. So I've already mentioned that the number they picked corresponded to the room that they would be in. So initially, everyone kind of thought that it was a fair play, that they were all making the same amount, they all had the same opportunities when it came to the numbers. But no, they were like way off. It's eventually revealed that the number they picked corresponds to the size of their room, but also how much they would be making. So it isn't until one day they're in the community room where one person shares their rates and other people start sharing their rates as well. And at this point, I actually paused the screen because I'm such a numbers nerd that I wanted to write each of them down to kind of figure out what the pattern would be. And it's eventually revealed to be the Fibonacci sequence. So essentially, number 8 has the largest room and she's making the most amount of money, and then number 1 is all the way at the bottom and making the least amount of money. So if that is not bad enough, remember rule number 2 of the game, which would be that food and shelter are provided. So everyone is hungry, wondering what happened to the food. All of a sudden, number 8 says, oh, didn't you guys all get food? Because I received 12 trays of food as well as 12 waters. And she ate all 12 trays of food, not even thinking about if anyone else had gotten anything. And then she used the 12 bottles of water to fill up her bathtub so that she could shower. And keep in mind, nobody else has a bathtub as well. And you should have seen the look on their faces, the absolute like shock and anger of finding out that she had 12 trays and decided to use all of them while they're starving and thirsty at the present moment. For anyone else who is a numbers nerd or is curious about how everyone's rates stacks up, here it is. So we have number 1 earning a rate of 10,000 won a minute. Number 2 earns 20,000 won a minute. Number 3 earns 30,000 won a minute. Number 4 earns 50,000 won a minute. Number 5 earns 80,000 won a minute. Number 6 earns 130,000 won a minute. Number 7 earns 210,000 won a minute. And finally, we have number 8, earning a total of 340,000 won a minute. I found the concept of the numbers to be super interesting because they did have a hand in it without realizing it. And there were several characters who kind of expressed regret over their selection because, like, obviously room number 8 was available on the table and they thought about picking it but didn't. And as a result, they're not making as much money as room number 8. And all of this kind of just goes to show that there's always some sort of division in the world, whether it's by race, class, or gender. And in this case, it's going to be division by numbers. So let's move on to Act 2, earning money. So how do they earn money, as well as will there be some tension between the higher numbers and the lower numbers? In the community room, there is a sign which served as a money counter. So they initially thought that's what they would be using as the community prize pool, and they were partially correct. Later on, they realized that it also serves as a way of keeping track of time. So as time progresses, the number that's shown goes down, and when it hits 0, the game is essentially over. So the question becomes, how do they earn time to keep the game going so that they can continue to earn more money? So number 8 reveals that she has discovered the way they can earn more time. And she says that it's by walking up and down the stairs, because on the first day when they were doing introductions and meeting each other, they walked up and down the stairs a lot of times to get from room to room. And as a result, they did earn a significant amount of money. So thus begins the great stair walking. Number 1 mentioned that he chose the first room because he has difficulty walking up and down the stairs due to his disability. And this becomes an issue when everyone is required to spend the same amount of time walking up and down the stairs so that everyone is equally contributing to the time increase. And due to his difficulty walking up and down the stairs, that rubs a lot of the players the wrong way, and it kind of just upsets them. I don't know what's wrong with these people, but essentially they start to make snide remarks towards him, and then my girl, number 3 steps in and helps as well, but number 2 steps in and helps, and they decide to essentially take on some of his responsibility. So they end up walking up and down the stairs more just so he can take a break. And this begins a lot of the tension we're gonna have in the show between the higher and lower floors. The higher floors believe they shouldn't have to do the same amount of labor as the lower floors because to them, their time is more valuable since they're earning more money per minute than everyone else. And honestly, half of that is very debatable. At some point, number 4 has a seizure, and when they try to use the community pool to buy medicine, number 6 tries to stop them. Remember I said he cares about his interests rather than the interests of the group. So in an effort to stop him, a full fight ensues. And I have to say bravo to the director, the cinematographer, or the editor for the scene because it's like gorgeous. So essentially they're fighting in slow-mo while the Four Seasons plays in the background. And at the end of the fight, they're able to take down number 6 temporarily and buy the medicine. And when they look up at the time counter, they realize that they received a huge boost in time because nobody wants to watch them walk up and down the stairs. Like, I agree, like, that's boring. Like, I'm not gonna tune in to watch that. What people want is to be entertained. This begins a very interesting conversation about society as well as content consumption. So let's take social media as an example. In order to stay relevant or go viral, people have to continuously outdo themselves and up the stakes every time, because there's always going to be a new video, a new story, or some sort of new trend. In this day and age, nothing really stays relevant for too long. Like, I honestly cannot recall what videos were extremely popular on TikTok even 2 months ago. Like, I don't even know if I could recall on the spot things that were viral a month ago, just because there's always new content coming out and there's always new things that people are talking about. Back to this idea of entertainment, we continuously tune into content despite the controversy or our dislike of our particular celebrity, because we reward those who not only entertain us but also those who shock us. And I feel like reality TV is such a good example of this, and I know that I spend probably way too much time watching it, but I remember when I first started watching, I think it was Vanderpump Rules, one of the cast members came out and publicly stated that during their first season, and this was before they got big, so this is when they were still working at their jobs when they were on the show, and they mentioned that they were actually incentivized to create more drama because the producers of the show would pay them more money, and that's exactly what's happening on the 8 show. As the show goes on, the type of entertainment they're presenting starts to escalate as well. It starts off tame with each person putting on a performance for a talent show. Honestly, some of them were really, really bad. Then it proceeds to sex, when number 8 announces to the group that it's her talent, so her and number 6 end up hooking up, and that earns the most money during the talent show. Do you want to guess what it is? Okay, I'm going to tell you. They earn 69 million won, which is very on the nose. We just talked about the talent show, and then we've progressed to sex as content. So how do you up the stakes from there? I'm going to tell you, you're going to add violence to it, because that's what happens next. They choose to play a game called King, where everyone randomly picks a ball, and whoever has the king ball can force other people to complete a task or face punishment. This again starts off tame with like hand holding, kissing, and making out, and eventually leads to fighting and people being tased. So for me, this was the part in the show where I started to feel a little uncomfortable, just because when they were playing the king game, the fighting almost resulted in one of the characters, specifically my favorite character, almost dying, as well as when they switched over to tasing people as punishment, the characters ended up, 1, passing out, but 2, they ended up wetting their pants as well, and it was just really a little uncomfortable and just like disturbing to watch. But the tension continues to grow between the lower and higher class as it's revealed that the only ones being tased are the lower floors. And guess who's in on it? Number 4. Remember when I said she's one of my least favorite characters? This is part of the reason why. And it just continues to get brutal from there, with the higher ups enacting more physical violence involving tying up and playing this kind of hide and seek game and brutally beating the lower levels. And then just when they've finished the game, they create more ways to torture them by creating games to determine whether or not they'll be able to eat after being tortured. At this point, the spirits of the lower levels is like literally just on the ground, but still they managed to kind of band together and come up with a plan to take down number 8, number 6, and number 4, thus changing the status quo. During this whole fight scene, like I was really nervous for them, because there would be a lot of back and forth where the lower levels were winning, and then number 6 would take over, and then the lower levels were winning, and then number 6 was back on top again. But ultimately it turned out that number 7 really came in clutch, and he was able to help them take down the higher levels. So they decide to tie up their tormentors in different rooms. I don't think I've talked about number 8's room, but oh my gosh, the audacity. Her room is gorgeous. There's wallpaper, flowers, candles, accent chairs, bath waters, plants, and even a bidet. Like, she has such good taste in decor. And as the lower levels were literally suffering, she was using the money they earned to make these purchases. The lower levels decide to spend their time living in the luxury of number 8's room, which very much feels justified because they have endured all of this torture, and now for once they actually get to rest and feel a little bit at ease. So while they're eating and just resting, they're talking about the game and starting to reflect as well as think about what happens next. So they decide that since there's absolutely no way to top all of the entertainment as well as all of the torture that was afflicted upon them, and they don't think that they have it in them to do the same thing to the higher levels, that they'll decide to live peacefully for the rest of the time, continue to earn money, and then eventually the clock will run out and the game would be over. Ha ha ha. Like, I can't believe they actually thought it would be that easy for the game to end, because they are mistaken and there is more drama ahead. This brings us to act number 3, which I'm calling the final performance. So just as they think that they're free, the game is going to be over, strange things start to happen. Specifically, violence towards the higher levels who are locked up in various rooms throughout the studio. So this leads to a lot of mistrust between the lower levels because clearly something is happening, and as a result, more time is being added to the clock and they're not able to end the game. And in addition to that, no one is fessing up, saying they're the ones who did it. So as a result, number 2 takes this into her hands and she locks everyone in their respective room, except for number 5, who is basically playing nurse, as that is her role, and is bringing food to everyone in their rooms. But this is also where we learn a little bit of information about number 5 in terms of the fact that she has like hallucinations. Because remember when I did her intro, I specifically mentioned the words that there was the man and then she woke up and realized that her husband had divorced her. Similarly here, she's seeing a lot of hallucinations of the people who are locked up, specifically the higher levels. And then when she comes to reality, it's revealed that those hallucinations she was having, she ended up actually freeing all of the higher levels. And as a result, chaos just ensues. So for me, this was kind of part of the tipping point of the show going downhill. So when the fight ensues, the higher ups are able to reclaim power again. And watching this, I don't know, I just felt really frustrated because throughout the 8 episodes, there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of people being tied up or the power struggle. And a lot of it is really just based on like physical force rather than any sort of strategy. And it's happened so many times that when it happened towards the end, like I was really just over it and ready for the show to end. During the fight, it's revealed that number 1 was actually the person who attacked the higher ups when they were tied up. And I was actually gagged at this reveal, but also they deserved so much worse. Just as number 6 goes to shoot number 1, number 8 tases him and he falls down and cracks his neck, not dying, but this puts her on top of the group. I'm not going to show too many clips of the torture that occurred next, but it was really brutal and not enjoyable to watch at all. Essentially, all of the characters, except for number 4 and number 8, are tied to a chair, their eyes are held open, they're shown blinking lights on repeat, their heads are in a bowl filled with water, and they are fed by hand every day by number 4. One day when number 4 is feeding number 1, he says that she can make more money than possible by switching rooms. And he knows that because at the beginning he asked the intercom if he could switch rooms, and the intercom showed him the cost, which would be 1 billion, which is super important because earlier in the show he was asked to decide how much money he needed to end the game, and he says 1 billion. Thus, a plan is hatched and spearheaded by number 4 to distract number 8 while she's playing golf so the others can free themselves. Once they're able to take down number 8, number 1 makes the room request to switch rooms with number 8. I honestly wasn't ready for this. The result is not a room switch. Oh my God, how could they do this to this man? But instead, it's instructions on how to switch rooms, which involves purchasing rooms rather than just automatically being able to switch. So if he wanted to purchase number 8's room, it would cost him a total of 340 billion won. So essentially, he's broke because of the purchase that he just made. So not wanting the show to end, number 1 grabs the gun and forces the characters to tie each other up. Yawn. Okay, look, they're tied up again. Is there really no other way for this to happen? Like, it's such a bore to see people being tied up over and over and over and over and over again on this show. Anyways, with everyone tied up, number 1 puts on a grand performance. He puts his talents to use and walks on a tightrope. The CGI in this section was looking kind of crazy. Like, it didn't look believable for a second. He continuously jumps on the tightrope, and in his head, he's reaching for the sun. But in reality, he jumps so high that he grabbed a ceiling camera and it comes crashing to the ground and catches on fire. And then he falls into the fire. This literally just made no sense whatsoever. And then he starts to burn. You literally cannot make this stuff up. And then everyone manages to free themselves. The question I had was, if they are able to free themselves now, couldn't they have done so earlier, like a few minutes ago? And as they're trying to find a way out, the time increases to 1,440 hours. So number 3 grabs a gun and decides to start destroying all of the cameras in the room because there can't be any viewers if there isn't a show. And as number 1 dies, the show finally comes to an end. Number 3 walks through the doors that they walked through on day 1, and he hears an audience cheering and clapping for him. But when he tracks down the sound, he's standing on a stage in an empty theater filled with speakers, and the text, "The End," appears on the screen. But it's not the end though, because we're gonna see them post-game in the future. In total, they were on the show for 2.5 months, and number 3 is still dealing with the effects of the psychological torture and witnessing the death of number 1. At the funeral that's held for number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 attend and find out that number 7 went to go see number 1's wife and gave her a bunch of money, not telling her that her husband had died. We also learned that number 8 had been arrested and is now in prison for destroying an art gallery with an excavator. After the funeral, they all part ways, not knowing anything about each other except for the numbers they shared. And in the post-credit scene, number 7 is at a bar with the producer and has written a new script detailing all of the events that happened in the show. He's still dealing with the aftermath and keeps telling himself that the events weren't real and none of it ever happened. The producer is obsessed with the script and says it might even lead to a sequel, wink at the camera. And the last image is of the script, which is titled The 8 Show. And that's a wrap. So what's the message of the show? Like, what are we supposed to take away from having watched this? It's very clear throughout that those who are on top, those who are in a higher position, tend to continuously stay in that position, while those who are at the bottom, such as the lower levels, typically have a harder time reaching the top. And I thought the idea of audience participation and viewership was a very interesting phenomenon to include in this, because it's super relevant to today, where everyone is essentially competing for our attention, which translates into our money, whether it's like influencers, whether it's shows, whether it's celebrities, or even just advertisements. Like, everyone wants our attention, and also everyone wants our data too, which is a whole other topic. And that's what truly bothers me about the show, like really, really bothers me, is that it's so interesting, it's so good, oh my God. And most importantly, it's just really thought-provoking. Like, at the end of the show, when number 3 exited the game and walked into the theater, realizing that there was actually no audience, I loved it because it's meta AF, because we are essentially the viewers. And while we're not actively adding hours like in the show, we are still continuously expressing our interest by hitting the next button over and over and over again, because the only way that the show truly ends, and this is related to other content as well, is just when we stop participating. But where the show really falls flat for me is in the execution, specifically in the second half of the show. The characters continuously made dumb decisions. There wasn't enough character development. We were finding out all of the information in the last episode, which is way too late, as well as very important plot devices, which we'll talk about when we get to the webtoon in a bit, weren't shared until the last episode as well. I recently browsed my drama list as well as Reddit specifically for this show, just because I was curious to see what other people had to say about the drama, just because I also like hearing other people's opinions, not just my own. And it is very divided. I feel like people either really love this show or really hate it. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle, maybe more towards like than hate, but everyone has vastly different opinions of the show and what they essentially took away from it as well. And some of the criticisms I heard online mirrored my own, as well as there were some new ones as well. For example, one, we don't really know any of the motivations of the characters. Two, the show just became a little too predictable once the higher ups essentially took control. Number three, which I very much agree with, it's really not artsy or fun seeing the characters get tortured. Like, it was really difficult to watch. Number four, the concept of room stealing should have been introduced a lot earlier on in the show, because it would have made for an interesting dynamic. And I'm a little confused on why that wasn't introduced earlier, specifically because, I mean, we'll talk about the webtoon in general, but in the webtoon specifically, that does become a major point of contention for the characters, and everyone knows that room stealing is a thing in the latter half of the story. Lastly, there's one thing that has been bugging me since I watched the show. Like, I'm literally losing sleep because I have not been able to figure out the answer to this question. And I'm really confused about the intended audience for the show. And I'm specifically talking geographically. So the intro for the show uses the song, you might have heard it, Mr. Lonely by Bobby Vinton, who, if you didn't know, is an American singer. And part of the reason this bothers me is because there are several like American elements throughout the intro that really don't make sense to me. So for example, when we talk about money, there are so many instances in the intro specifically where we see $100 bills scattered throughout. But the South Korean currency is won, which I mentioned when I was talking about the room rates. And in the show, they keep saying won. But in the intro specifically, there is not one image of South Korean currency at all. And in addition to that, like, this is a K-drama. This is on, I mean, I guess it's on Netflix, but still, this is adapted from two webtoons by a South Korean illustrator and writer. So it's a little weird for Mr. Lonely to, one, be the intro song, because I don't think I have heard of or even watched another K-drama that had like an American song as their intro. And as well, there should be some imagery of like the South Korean currency when part of the show really is about money. So if you have an answer to that, please let me know, because this is something that has really been bugging me about the show. One of the areas the show really excels at is the cinematography. Like, oh my God, the use of color, lighting, as well as the composition of the shots is so gorgeous. Like, I was taking notes the entire time, specifically in episode 1. And one of the things I love that the show did is whenever we were taken to moments, whether it's like flashbacks or the beginning or end of the show that doesn't take place in the reality game show, it would be shown in like a 4:3 format, which is super helpful because it allows us to kind of discern what timeline we're in. But also it was just really beautiful and it gave kind of like a retro feel to it. So I will definitely be looking up whoever was in charge of that because it was beautiful. So my closing thoughts, while there are a lot of things I didn't particularly enjoy about this show, I was hooked to my screen. I think I binged this all in like a Sunday afternoon. And I really continuously pressed next because I honestly wanted to know what happened next. So as I mentioned earlier, like if you loved Squid Games, if you're okay with some of the gore, I don't think I was particularly, as well as if you're very interested in human psychology, as well as how characters are interacting, then I would definitely recommend this show and I would say that you'll definitely enjoy it. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I read the source material, specifically Money Game and Pie Game, in preparation for not only the show, but also this video as well. So the show claims to be based on both of those, but I honestly don't find that to be true because the show most closely follows the second webtoon, which is Pie Game. Before this, the only webtoon I had read was Lore Olympus. So Money Game and Pie Game typically aren't the type of genre I would usually go for. Like I really gravitate more towards the romances. But oh my God, like I could not put this down. I think I stopped reading everything else just because I was hooked onto each specific episode for both of these webtoons. And honestly, I fell in love with it by the end. I'm not trying to spoil too much about the webtoons because I also do think everyone should read both of them and they were amazing from start to finish. The author, Bae Jin Soo, does such an amazing job at taking us through the mind of our protagonist number 3, which I feel like was missing a little bit from the show, but also he is able to write it in such a way where I'm able to kind of feel some sort of compassion and relate to a lot of the characters, which I feel like, as we've discussed, that's really what was missing for me in terms of the show itself. And that's really a big piece because when I was reading Money Game and Pie Game, but more specifically Money Game, there was a point where it was like 2 a.m. and I was legitimately crying and like bawling my eyes out because of something that happened to a character I like. And I enjoy kind of being able to feel those intense emotions just because the writing was so good. Like I can't state that enough. Like the author is so amazing. In addition to that, the author is really good at providing lots of twists and turns that you don't initially see coming, which keeps us on the edge of our seat. And I would say that I thought the show did an okay job at following some of the main points of Pie Game, but there was a lot of context as well as a lot of other plot points which I feel like weren't fully carried out. Like I would love to see, I feel like this is so bad, but I would love to see someone redo this, but actually start with Money Game, which provides a lot of the context because a lot of the characters actually participated in Money Game first, which was the first game show. And then they moved on to Pie Game, which is the second show. So they reference a lot of that in the webtoon. And because we don't have that context, it makes it also harder to like follow the characters as well as see their character progression because they grew over time between the different games that they've played, and they reference it so much because it has such an impact on the decisions that they make in Pie Game. And for anyone wondering, the ending for Pie Game is actually completely different than the ending in the show. And it's not a surprise that I'm gonna say it, but I thought the ending in the webtoon was significantly better. And as I've said multiple times, because we have all the additional context and we're able to see the characters grow, that the ending in the webtoon, which I'm not going to spoil, had more of an emotional and it had more of an impact to me. So, should you read the webtoons? 100% yes. It's very, very good. And it talks a lot about like capitalism, society, what does like rule structure, what does it mean to also kind of like be a psychopath, what is morals. Like there's so many important conversations happening in the webtoon, and I feel like the show just didn't do a great job at being able to fully capture the intent of the webtoon. So I'm super excited because I think it was announced or it's already in the works, but Bae Jin Soo has one more installation of this series, which is going to be called Funny Game. And I think it's going to be released in English sometime this year. So I'm really looking forward to it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of the 8th show. Have you read the webtoon? Are you planning on reading the webtoon? And are there any other dramas similar to this one that you would recommend? In terms of other dramas I'm watching at the moment, Lovely Runner is like my happy little drama that I'm currently obsessed with, and I'm planning on starting Connections, so I can't wait to chat about those. On that note, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one.